In this video, I'm going to explain a framework for teaching algorithms with interactive system. Me as a teacher, normally we have the goal to teach an algorithm, and it's sometimes difficult to explain just with the programming code. So in some cases it's useful to have this kind of tool like the one I have developed for NQueens, so the students can know how the algorithm goes forward, for example, in the backtracking algorithms, and then goes backward, and in this way they can see, for example, the key parameters of the backtracking, and they can see how they evolve. So they have like some kind of debugger, but very visually. So in this way they can go forward in the algorithm and see all the steps that the algorithm takes. So for solving this, I have developed this JavaScript framework, and I have simplified this with the NQueens. So let's see the key points of this framework. So in this way, it's useful for learners of JavaScript, for example, or for teachers that want to use them. So the algorithm, the framework use these closure functions in JavaScript so that they encapsulate all the behavior in the same object. In this way, you cannot mess with all the namespaces and so on. You only have TAI as the name of this framework. So basically, you have these functions. The first thing that you have to know is when you are talking in recursive algorithms, sometimes you will like to stop and then wait until the user press next. So in this occasion, how do you wait for the user to press? This can be done with the callbacks functions, in which you store a function and you can also store the parameters. So in this way, you store like the state of the algorithm, like all the parameters and the next recursive call, and then when you press next, you do the next call. But the problem here with the backtracking algorithms is that you have to do these many calls, and so you have to store in some kind of a stack all these recursive calls. For example, in the NQueens problem, when you start at the beginning, then you will store in the queue one recursive call for each first position of the queen. And then when you go to the next one, then you store again many recursive calls. But when you are at the end, you have to pop up the last call. So we do this with two stacks, which basically store the call with the weight, and then it store the parameters and the function. And when the user press the next, this function will be called, and it will pop up the functions with the parameter and will call them. So you basically see that you can implement this with type. For example, in the NQueens, in the JavaScript algorithm, when you are calculating the NQueens, then you can pop the next call saying TAI.wait. So in this way, it waits with certain parameters. We have used this object, these JavaScript objects, to store all the variables that we need, all the parameters. Calls attack, diagonals decreasing, diagonals increasing, that you can see here. So in this way, we use an object with all the parameters that we need as fields. So yeah, what other things the algorithm has? What other functionalities this framework has? These are, for example, for showing something. For example, for showing arrays of booleans, we can, or arrays of any kind. I have implemented this function that can show an array. So basically, it puts them in a table and prints the value. In case it's a boolean, then it will use different colors. If it's number, they will pop up the same color. But if there are booleans, then we will have different colors, so it's easier to see. What else do we have? We have a function just to put the message attached with a tag mseg, and for that we also, like part of the framework, if we see the index.html, we need like the button start, which basically call to the start function, and the next one it will establish the execution, and this next identifier will be detected by the framework, because as you can see, when we attach the execute button, we will attach for the on click on the next. So in this way, whenever we start, then we establish this is next as the execution button, and then we start the whole algorithm. And the framework also create this general variable, this global variable that have all the functionality. So even if we have only this object, once we include or once we use this framework, then we can always interact with this single object. Okay. In the case of n queens, we have to implement several specific things, like for example, showing the chessboard. So here we have the create of chessboard, which basically creates the table with different classes, white and black. And for this, we use a specific .css, a specific style sheet file. TAI also has its own style sheet. For n queens, we just have the colors of the background colors of the chessboard cells, right? And the size of the queens, right? Because we only have one image in this particular problem. Okay, so yeah, we created the showing the chessboard and showing where. So you check in the solution. Queens has this, as we have explained in the previous algorithm. We encode the position of the queens as just for each row. We encode which is the position of the queen. And we also have this k variable, meaning until which partial solution we have. So right now, for example, we have already placed 7 queens. So we have the first 7 positions. So basically, this shows the 7 queens in their position. So it's much easier to see for the student, right? So in this way, we can encode easily, we can program easily interactive tools. And yeah, so the learners of JavaScript can learn, for example, with these closer functions in which you return the functions, which is a very similar thing to what we use in object-oriented programming when we are defining class. And this can be useful for teachers. It can be useful for an example of how they can develop their own algorithm. So basically, is useful for basically. It was basically developed for backtracking algorithms, but it can be applied to any recursive algorithm, or even so if you want to apply to iterative algorithm, even if you don't need the stack and you can have one code, but it's more general so you can actually use it. So yeah, so this you have an example of how to use the framework and how it was programming. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you learned something for this. Okay, thank you very much. Bye.